The following broadcast is made possible by generous contributions from viewers like you. Thank you.
4,000 years ago, the creator of the universe made an everlasting covenant with Abraham. All the land, from the Euphrates to the Nile, belongs to the sons of Israel. Shock waves will shake the earth as heaven reaches down to fulfill that promise.
The Gulf of Aqaba, or as it is called in the Hebrew Scriptures, the Yam-Suph. This body of water covers an underwater gorge that is larger than the Grand Canyon. It was here, at the ancient seaport of Etzion-Geber, near Eilat, that King Solomon built his navy yard. According to the Hebrew Scriptures, this is the same body of water, the Yam-Suph, the Reed Sea, inaccurately translated Red Sea, that Moses parted when he led the children of Israel from Egypt to Mount Sinai over in the land of Midian. The entire Egyptian cavalry was destroyed as they attempted to pursue Moses through this very sea. Recently, a team of scientists using robotic submarine cameras filmed the coral-encrusted remains of Pharaoh's chariots and army strewn for over 1.5 miles at the bottom of the Reed Sea. I'm Michael Rood. Prepare for a rude awakening.
Prepare for a rude awakening.
This is the scroll of the first 5 books of the Bible. In Hebrew, it is called the Torah. Torah means the instructions. The Torah records that the Creator spoke directly to a man named Abraham and told him to come out of the land of the Chaldeans, also known as Babylon, which was completely immersed in pagan sun god worship. For his obedience, Abraham was promised that his offspring would inherit all of the land from the river Euphrates in modern-day Iraq to the Nile in Egypt. The name of the Torah's first book, Genesis, is Bereshit in Hebrew, meaning in the beginning. It records how Abraham's offspring came to dwell in the land of Mitzrayim, known today as Egypt. Yam-Suph, one of the 12 sons of Yaakov, the grandson of Abraham, had 2 prophetic dreams that caused deep resentment among his brothers. Intending to kill him at first, his brothers instead sold him as a slave to Midianite merchants, who in turn sold Yam-Suph to the Egyptians. After several years, Yam-Suph was summoned before the throne of Egypt to interpret Pharaoh's extremely disturbing dream. Yam-Suph's interpretation indicated that there would be 7 years of abundance in Egypt, followed by 7 years of worldwide famine. Pharaoh made Yam-Suph prime minister in Egypt and put him in charge of acquiring and storing provisions during the years of plenty. Yam-Suph, called Imhotep by the Egyptians, built the huge grain storage and distribution center, Saqqara. The years of abundance and famine came just as Yam-Suph had said. And during the 7 years of famine, the wealth of the world flowed into the coffers of Egypt. Yam-Suph was heralded as the savior of Egypt, as Imhotep was elevated to the status of a god. Yam-Suph's father, brothers, and their family were transported by a royal caravan from their famine-stricken home in Canaan and brought into the land of Egypt, where they were given the choicest land in the empire, the land of Goshen, in the fertile Nile Delta. The second book in the Torah, Shemot, or Exodus, documents the history of the Israelites whom Yam-Suph brought to Egypt and how they became slaves. The Torah records how the Almighty delivered them from bondage and brought them to Mount Sinai to teach them how to govern themselves according to His instructions. In the succeeding generations after Yam-Suph, the children of Israel flourished, and the Egyptians grew afraid that they would become greater than Egypt. A new pharaoh, unfamiliar with Yam-Suph's accomplishments, put the Israelites under the whip of slave masters and commanded at one point that all of their male children be killed. One of those children, hidden in a basket in the Nile River, was found by a member of Egypt's royal household. He was named Moshe, which means drawn out of the water, and he was raised in the court of Pharaoh. The book of Shemot records that Moses, killed an Egyptian who struck one of the Hebrew slaves. To save his own life, Moshe fled the land of Egypt, successfully avoiding the Egyptian military patrols as he traveled the spice route to the land of Midian, the northwest corner of what is now called Saudi Arabia. Moses became a shepherd in the land of Midian, tending the flocks of Jethro, the priest of Midian. Moses eventually married Jethro's daughter Sephora and raised his family in the shadow of Mount Sinai. One day, 40 years after fleeing Egypt, Moses' attention was caught by a bush that seemed to burn endlessly without being consumed. When he turned aside to see this wonder, Yahweh spoke to Moses out of the burning bush and instructed him to return to Egypt to deliver the children of Israel from bondage. Moses was to lead Israel back to that very mountain in Midian to worship the God of their fathers. Moses returned to Egypt and requested that Pharaoh grant Israel the freedom to travel 3 days into the wilderness and do sacrifice to the God of their fathers. And they would need to take all of their flocks and possessions with them. Pharaoh owned these people. He was not going to let them out of his sight. He declared that he did not know the God of Israel. Well, a series of plagues over the next several months would change that declaration, because the God of Israel decimated the land of Egypt and exposed their pagan gods as human inventions. The final of 10 plagues killed the firstborn in the land of Egypt. Only those who followed Moshe's instructions explicitly were spared. They were to take a blemishless male lamb or goat of the first year into their homes and prepare it for 4 days. Late in the afternoon of the 14th of the month of the Aviv barley, they were to kill the lamb and apply its blood to the doorpost and lintels of their homes. After sunset, they were to eat the lamb with bitter herbs and unleavened bread. They ate the meal standing, with their coats on, their staffs in hand, and ready to leave in the early hours of the morning. About midnight, death passed over the homes of the Israelites and the Gentiles who were obedient to the instructions. But there was death in almost every Egyptian home. Early the next morning, the mixed multitude of obedient Israelites and obedient Gentiles left the land of Goshen and assembled for their journey at the city of Sukkot. Rudimentary explanation. Sukkot in Hebrew means tent or tabernacle. The city of Sukkot, or city of tents, most likely refers to the large open plain adjacent to Saqqara, Yam-Sup's grain distribution center. Visiting merchants during the time of famine were not allowed to remain in the land of Egypt. They would have continued to camp in their portable desert tents or sukkahs during their brief stay. That tent city became known to the Hebrews as Sukkot. It would have been a well-known landmark to the people, with a large open plain in which to assemble, and their last stop to gather the bones of Yam-Suph from the step pyramid of Saqqara in which he was entombed, thus fulfilling their oath to Yam-Suph made 400 years earlier, that when Elohim visits you, you shall surely carry up my bones from this place. The path of Israel's exodus followed the established trade route to Midian, which crossed the area of the Bitter Lakes, followed the eastern shore of the Gulf of Suez, and then cut through a mountain pass straight into the heart of the wilderness of Zin. When Israel fled from Pharaoh, they traveled day and night. They were shielded from the heat of the desert sun by a cloud in the day, and they were warmed by a pillar of fire at night. Pharaoh was informed by the sentries along the trade route that Israel had fled. He knew that they had left the land of Goshen, but the 3 days he permitted for their travel had expired, and they just kept going. It was obvious to Pharaoh that they had no intention of returning to build his treasure cities. Pharaoh ordered a mounted assault in hopes of catching Israel before they escaped into the land of Midian. As Pharaoh approached from the rear, Israel encountered trouble on their eastern front. The Philistines controlled the trade route through the northern territory of the Yam-Suph. The people were too exhausted to face the Philistines in battle, so Yahweh instructed Moshe, "Turn and encamp by the sea before Pi-Hahiroth. Pharaoh will say, 'The children of Israel are entangled in the land.'" As Israel turned south near Etham, they entered into this twisting maze of a dry riverbed known as the Wadi Watir. The mountains formed 1,000-foot walls on each side of the path. They were literally entangled in the land. There was no way out until they reached Pi-Hahiroth, which means the mouth of the gorges, at the shore of the Yam-Suph. As Pharaoh approached this very familiar route to the military outpost of Migdol, he knew that he had Israel trapped. Israel made it to the beach at what is now called Nueva and pitched camp. Then they heard the thunder of chariots coming from the gorge through which they had just passed. To the south, the mountains met the crashing sea. It was impassable. To the north, the Egyptian military outpost of Migdol made retreat up the coast impossible. To their front, Baal-Zephon in the land of Midian lay across 8 miles of water, and the Egyptian cavalry was now at their back door. As Pharaoh gave the order to attack, a bolt of fire out of heaven's door separated Pharaoh's army from the camp of Israel. Through the night, the pillar of fire held Pharaoh's army at bay as a mighty wind rent the heavens. In the morning's first light, Israel awoke to a path of dry ground that led through the midst of the sea. Just 300 feet out from this shoreline, the sea floor suddenly drops into a 5,000-foot deep underwater chasm, nearly a mile straight down. This is the Great Rift, a fracture in the Earth's crust that begins at the Dead Sea and continues for 3,000 miles into the continent of Africa. If the water were to be removed, it would still be impossible to cross this chasm, which is as deep and wide as the Grand Canyon in Arizona. But south of here, at the beach where Israel camped, an underwater land bridge gently slopes at a 6-degree angle, levels out at about 900 feet, and then gradually rises to meet the western shore of Midian. During the Six-Day War in 1967, Israel captured this land all the way to the River Nile, just as was promised to Abraham. The Israeli Army Corps of Engineers was building this road to help patrol their newly acquired land when an amateur archaeologist from America, Ronald Wyatt, found this column awash on the shore. No inscriptions were legible, and there was no telling how many centuries it had been eroding on the beach. But this huge column was unmistakably Phoenician in structure, which dates back to the time of King Solomon, who built his navy yard on this body of water about 40 miles north of Nueva. The Army engineers brought in a large crane and set this column in concrete back from the water's edge. A year later, a covert reconnaissance mission to the opposite shore in Saudi Arabia found an identical column still standing. On it was the legible remains of ancient Paleo-Hebrew inscriptions. The words, Pharaoh, Death, Mitzrayim, Egypt, King Solomon, and the sacred name Yod-He-Vav-He, Yahweh. King Solomon, the wisest man who ever lived, knew exactly where the children of Israel made their escape just 500 years before, and so he established pillars to memorialize the Yam-Suph crossing. After the children of Israel crossed the sea onto the shores of Midian, the pillar of fire dissipated, and Pharaoh's army followed the open path through the parted waters. Just before the charging chariot reached the stragglers ascending the opposite shore, Yahweh looked down from heaven and broke off the wheels of their chariots. The 900-foot walls of water collapsed, crushing the army of Pharaoh and drowning them in the sea. This abbreviated account of the Exodus from the Torah fills in the muddled history of Egypt. To understand modern Egyptology, we need to understand the history of Egypt first. After Alexander the Great conquered Egypt, one of his successors, Ptolemy Philadelphus, commissioned an Egyptian priest named Manetho to provide a history of their nation. In his glorified rendition of Egypt's past, Manetho reported that gods ruled Egypt for about 28,000 years. After that, men ruled Egypt for 30 dynasties. The two oldest copies of this history to survive differ on more than 1,500 past rulers of Egypt. It is obvious that this history was not considered genuine enough to copy accurately. Would you? For 28,000 years, gods ruled Egypt? Yeah, right. But to this day, modern Egyptology is still based on this fairy tale explanation of Egypt's past. Some people need to believe in Santa Claus. Ptolemy, likewise, requested a history from the Israelites under his jurisdiction. They took his request a bit more seriously and sent 72 rabbis to Alexandria, Egypt, where they translated every single word of the Hebrew Scriptures into the Greek language. This document, known today as the Septuagint, is not without error, but every single word can still be compared against the Torah, which has remained unchanged for more than 3,400 years. Many historians and theologians base their interpretation of ancient Egyptian history upon the grandiose rendition of one Egyptian priest, while ignoring the accuracy of the Torah and Septuagint. To add to this error, Constantine's mother, Helena, while on a mission to find new idols to worship, declared that Mount Sinai is in the Sinai Peninsula of Egypt. Sorry for this rude interruption, but the scriptures plainly state King Solomon made a navy of ships in Ezion-Geber, which is beside Elat, on the shore of the Yam-Suph, or Reed Sea. We are just south of Elat, off the shore of Ezion-Geber, and I am in the Yam-Suph, or Reed Sea. What is so difficult about determining the body of water that Moshe crossed? The Bible gives us just one choice, and this is it. Oh, I know that Constantine would have you dismembered for implying that his mother picked out the wrong site for Mount Sinai. But Constantine is dead. And so are the traditions that have enslaved our minds to such idiocy that we cannot even read the plain text of the Bible and think for ourselves. I gotta get me a new one of these. Rav Shaul, who was a master of the Hebrew Scriptures, stated that Mount Sinai is in Arabia. He ought to know, unlike Helena, he actually lived in Arabia. Even though no archaeological artifacts substantiate Helena's claim, Christian theologians have insisted that the Bible must be in error, rather than church tradition. Jewish scholars recognize that Helena's Sinai is a Roman fabrication, with no basis in reality. Chariot parts, weapons of war, and horse and human remains would have long ago dissolved in the briny depths of the Yam-Suph. We would not expect to find any vestige of the battlefield wreckage of Pharaoh's army after 3,400 years in the sea, unless there was a natural way that artifacts are preserved in a saltwater environment. Coral does not begin growing on sand or silt. They are living organisms that must have an object on which to attach and nutrients with which to grow. A unique feature of saltwater coral allows it to attach to a submerged artifact, derive nutrients from the decaying object, and grow in such a manner as to take on the shape of the artifact itself. In the absence of continuing nutrition, the coral dies and leaves a uniquely formed mineral deposit. Dr. Lennart Moller, a scientist with the Karolinska Institute in Stockholm, Sweden, which awards the Nobel Prize in the field of science, and an international team of research biologists led by Vivica Pontien, brought state-of-the-art scientific equipment to the Reed Sea crossing site in the spring of 2000. Moller and Pontien were skeptical at first, but became interested in the project after seeing evidence from a previous exploration of the site. What they found strewn across the bottom of the Reed Sea has shaken the religious and scientific community. Cameras mounted on remote-controlled submarines revealed coral-encrusted chariot parts, horse and human remains strewn like battlefield wreckage on the bottom of the Red Sea. 90-degree angles rarely occur in nature, but here, on the underwater land bridge, a plethora of strange coral formations exhibit the features of chariot cabs, 1-meter diameter chariot wheels attached to broken axles, and hundreds of coral artifacts in which high levels of iron can still be detected by magnetometers. Scientific proof that this coral has attached itself to the metal artifacts that litter this underwater junkyard. Numerous circular artifacts evidencing a circumference of iron are randomly scattered over the underwater battleground. They measure approximately 1 meter in diameter, the very dimensions of the chariot wheels found in Tutankhamun's tomb. Some are resting on the seafloor near what appear to be solitary chariot cabs. Others are attached to broken axles, and some stand on a 1-meter circular coral base with an upright shaft the same width as an Egyptian chariot, and are crowned with another 1-meter diameter coral circle. Even a novice can readily see that these are not natural coral formations. After Israel returned the Sinai to Egypt in 1982, one 6-spoke chariot wheel was removed from the seafloor and taken to Cairo for examination. The director of the Egyptian Department of Antiquities, Nasif Mohammed Hassan, immediately identified the artifact as being a chariot wheel from the 18th dynasty, an identical match to the chariot wheels preserved in Tutankhamun's tomb. 18th dynasty chariot parts on the bottom of the Red Sea fit perfectly with the inscriptions on the granite shrine of El Arish found in the 1860s. The inscriptions state that Pharaoh Tom vanished in a whirlpool at Pi-Hahiroth in a battle against a god. Pi-Hahiroth is the very place that the Hebrew Scriptures report Pharaoh's demise. The book of Shemot, Exodus, records that Israel was building a treasure city for the Pharaoh called Pi-Tom, city of Tom, at the time of the Exodus. Tom was the Pharaoh of the Exodus, not Ramses or Yul Brynner. The Yam-Suph chariot parts and the El Arish inscriptions both contradict modern Egyptology, so further removal of artifacts from the crossing site for scientific analysis was immediately outlawed, and the 6-spoke chariot wheel was quickly buried in Egypt's antiquities archives. This gold-veneered 4-spoke chariot wheel was photographed and buried in place with a marker buoy nearby. So as not to be lost to the Egyptians, it will remain submerged until the Sinai Peninsula is returned to Israel. The wood has completely decayed, but the metal hub is encrusted with coral. Because coral does not attach to gold or silver, this priceless specimen remains untarnished by time. Egyptian images consistently exhibit the pharaoh warring from his royal chariot equipped with gold 4-spoke chariot wheels, not even an aftermarket option on the standard war chariots of the day. Strong evidence that this is actually one of the 2 chariot wheels that Pharaoh Tom rode to his death. For many people, finding the genuine Red Sea crossing site is bad news. Blissful ignorance has died, and you recognize that the Creator has revealed himself through his people and his prophets. But this is good news to those who truly believe in the God of Israel and obey his commandments. Here on the bottom of the Yam-Suph rests the evidence that the Creator has acted on behalf of his people in the past, proof that you can count on his promise that in the last days he will perform a miracle that will make the parting of the Red Sea pale by comparison. I'm Michael Rood, inviting you to join us again next time for A Rude Awakening. And I'll see you when the smoke clears.
Together, we can bring it to the world.
The following broadcast is made possible by generous contributions from viewers like you. Thank you.